What are we going to do? What is this subcommittee all about? To identify just what we've talked about, what happened, why did it happen, and how do we prevent it from happening again?
Those are some of the changes that we're focused on right now, is just how can we use technology to ensure that the data is tracked in a better manner. Let's sample more often. Previous to boil water notices, we were tracking, or testing, I should say, chlorine residuals at different points throughout the system, mainly the towers, weekly. We've changed that to daily. TCEQ requires to check for nitrates and nitrification every 90 days. We've moved that to weekly. And so we're doing our part to try and ensure that we not only are sampling more frequently to try and identify things being off sooner, but also doing it in a manner that exposes more people to that data.
We can utilize or leverage technology to help decrease the possibility of human error, then that's what we need to do.
I do want to extend an appreciation for you guys for holding this organization accountable and saying, hey, we didn't do it right, but here's what we are going to do. And I think you said that. You said, we're going to make this right and we're going to do it the right way. Well, hey, Victoria, welcome back to another episode of Town Talk. Today's episode is going to be a little bit different. As you all are very aware, we had 2 recent boil water notices that impacted our community. And so, of course, today's episode, we're going to address those. We understand there's been a lot of frustration, confusion, concerns, right? And so today's episode is to address the facts, identify what has taken place, right? And what steps are being done now and in the future to prevent it from happening again. So, of course, we have today here our Mayor, Duane Crocker, and our City Manager, Jesús Garza, to go through that. They're going to talk about the timeline of actions that happened, the subcommittee's work and their findings, and then, of course, what's being done right now. That's kind of already in motion from what I understand. So to talk to us more about that are these 2 that we have here. So thank you both so much, by the way, for being here.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah. Thanks, Ashley.
Thanks you very
for the
much.
Opportunity.
Of course.
Absolutely.
Well, Mayor, I want to start with you.
Okay.
And so, kudos to you. I know it's been a rough ride lately, right? But the community has experienced and expressed a lot of, understandably so, frustration. And so I wanted to kind of let you help set the tone for what was it that city leadership did, and can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. And you're exactly right. There is a lot of frustration, a lot of questions, a lot of concerns out there, and those were shared. Both within the city, within council.
Right.
Look, we wanted to address this. We wanted to figure out what was going on, see how we make it better. Our response from the council side was twofold. Response number 1 is, all right, we have an issue, let's solve the problem. Okay, so that's what we were really focused on initially. I liken it to, if you have a fire on your stovetop, you don't sit down at the kitchen table and say, gee, why do I have a fire? You grab a fire extinguisher and put out the fire, right?
Right.
Then you figure out, okay, how did this happen? So initially, we just wanted to give whatever support, whatever resources that we could to Mr. Garza, to, Public Works, figure out, what do you guys need? How can we help? Let's get this resolved. Okay?
Absolutely.
Once that was done, then the next step was, okay, how are we going to analyze this? How are we going to address this? Which was what led to me appointing the subcommittee. I thought it was important that we put a group together with experience, which Dr. Young and Jan obviously has, and then with our staff that was involved, and actually take a deep dive into more than, okay, what do we think happened? Let's actually find out what happened, why it happened, and what do we do going forward to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Right.
And so that was really the whole purpose of putting the subcommittee together, was to address those issues.
Right. And potentially against organizational bias, right? That kind of can be a thing.
From a committee standpoint, instead of just saying, hey, let's appoint a couple of people, you guys go figure out what's going on. When you bring in a committee, you're actually bringing in different perspectives.
Sure.
Everybody has their own ideas. They may have their own kind of pressure points, if you will, about what's important and what isn't. And when you when you bring in people who aren't necessarily part of the day-to-day operations, then you do guard against that kind of organizational bias that shows up in the, well, that's how we've always done it kind of mindset, you know? And the other thing that I think it did is more than just the department saying, well, here's what happened, and people going, well, maybe it did, maybe it didn't. I wanted to make sure that the citizens could trust and have confidence that the subcommittee was made up of people who are going to give them good answers and come out and have their concerns top of mind, which obviously all of us on council, that's what we're there for. And so the committee approach, I think, was absolutely the right approach, and I'm very proud of the work that's been done. I know there's more work that'll be done going forward.
Absolutely. And you said it so well at the council meeting. In case anyone didn't know, and if you're listening or watching, we did have a special city council meeting that Mayor and Jesús, our city manager, called on Wednesday. If you're not in the week that we're putting this out there, it was on August 13th.
Correct.
My son's first day of school, by the way. Lots going on.
Big day.
It was a big week. But man, you said it so well. And so I want to cut to a clip that we actually, AJ, if you don't mind, it's the first clip of Mayor talking about
speculation, unsupported opinions, rumors, knee-jerk reactions do not serve our community well at all. Instead, proper and effective governance is needed, and it requires more than an adoption of the loudest narrative. This is exactly why I formed the subcommittee of the City Council and tasked that subcommittee with the job of taking a measured, strategic, and methodical approach to investigating these issues. This approach ensures that our conclusions are based on verified facts, not on assumptions, and that the recommendations we ultimately come forward with are realistic and effective.
And that was it. So if you didn't catch that, we wanted to give our viewers and our audience another opportunity to hear directly from you, Mayor, from that meeting and the experience of just being in the room. So I hope that helped. Did you want to add anything to that before we?
No, I don't know necessarily add a whole lot to it other than to say that I think that really encapsulated kind of where I was going with the subcommittee was, there's a whole lot of speculation out there. There's a whole lot of guesswork that was going on in the community. And quite frankly, from myself personally, I can say, I didn't know what happened,
Right.
But I wanted to find out.
Absolutely.
And so the subcommittee basically was put in place to provide the best vehicle to get to answers.
And you guys,
that's really what we've done.
Right. And you guys did that really well in the meeting. So Jesús, I'm going to go ahead and pin it over to you here in a sec, but you did very much that. You gave an interim report, right? So it's still ongoing, but for now, you guys were able to give to the public some of the root causes, some of the factors leading to the boil water notice. And I know a big discussion that was even new to me, and I'm still learning about it, is nitrification. Is that right, Jesús?
Yes. But before I walk you through some of that, I echo the sentiment expressed by the mayor and council that this is obviously a serious matter, right? And at the special council meeting, I verbalized that regardless of whether the council would have put together or the mayor would have put together a subcommittee or not, this was obviously a serious issue that we were going to have to get to the bottom of, right, to try and prevent it from happening again.
Right.
Obviously, when something happens that creates disruption, not only amongst our residents but also businesses, it's a big issue, right? And so I saw a lot of benefit from the creation of the subcommittee because it really put myself and staff in a position to ensure that we were as quick as possible to trying to figure out what happened. I think there's a lot of value in having representation of the voice of the people at the table, right? I think it's important to have elected officials who set the policy direction at the table, in the weeds, understanding what happened. Because ultimately, one of my primary responsibilities is to propose a budget, right? And so the more informed and educated council is on why we need money to do certain things, the better, right? And so from day one, I was focused on, to the mayor's point, you're focused on getting through it, but immediately afterwards, it's trying to figure out, okay, what do we need to do to ensure it doesn't happen again? And the committee did a great job, and the mayor did a great job in outlining a very methodical, phased approach to it. And I actually want to turn it over back to the mayor to kind of walk through that because he deserves a lot of credit for this.
Sure.
Shortly after the committee was put together, there's, I don't want to say uncertainty, but in the absence of clear direction, right? Everybody has their own opinion on what are we going to talk about first? Where do we start? And the mayor deserves a lot of credit in the work that he put in developing a framework to the committee. And I'd like to give him an opportunity to walk through that.
Yeah, sure. So, anytime you're walking into something, I like to plan my work and work my plan. Right?
Yeah.
And I thought, well, let's carry that over to the subcommittee's work. And so, basically, we decided one of the first things we did was say, what was the scope? What are we going to do? What is this subcommittee all about?
Right.
Very easy, I think, to identify just what we've talked about. What happened, why did it happen, and how do we prevent it from
Right.
happening again? Through that, then we said, okay, well, how are we going to answer those questions? What's the process? And so we actually set up some phases, if you will, of different work that we wanted to undertake. The first phase was basically informational in nature. Literally to the point of like Water System 101. Explain to all of us, walk us through what our water system does, what are the components that make it up, where are these towers, where is that tower, where's this pump station, walk through the whole system, ask questions, make sure we understand the background of what we're about to take a deeper dive into. Then we took the deeper dive into things like the concept of nitrification, which you mentioned earlier. What causes it? How do you address it? We ask a whole lot of questions through that process, and ask questions about our process, and how we address nitrification. What does our nitrification action plan look like? Things of that nature. We also toured the water plant. As I mentioned in the meeting, we actually physically walk through and we're able to ask some additional questions about how the lab operates, what kind of testing is done, show me where the logs are, show me where the SCADA system data is presented to the operators. Talked with the operators and met with folks. So that was really kind of the first step, and then told staff, hey, we need more information, and here's the things we need. Okay, so we moved into phase 2 then, was actually look at the data we have, and the additional data that was provided, and finalize what was really kind of an initial timeline that staff had put together. Because we wanted to make sure that timeline was supported with not only robust data, okay, not just kind of speculation, but that also that it was supported with verified data.
Right.
And so we looked at logs, we looked at different records that were brought in to show over a period of time dating back after the incident and or before the incident and after the incident. Kind of what was the data that we were working with, what was the information we have, and when did we have it. From there, we got a good feel for the timeline, and we got a good feel for that we had good information in order to determine a root cause. Our next step was really to kind of look at, okay, what's in the system itself that could have led to this, both in terms of technology, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of processes that we have. And that's, as I mentioned in the meeting on Wednesday or on the 13th, that is still an ongoing process, but we feel like we've completed that process well enough for this incident, or for these two incidents, to be able to then move on to the root cause analysis. And so, we did determine the root cause analysis, and I think going forward, we will continue to look at technology, we will continue to look at processes and how we can use those to bolster what our system is. Our root cause analysis, just as a quick overview, is basically human error. And so we look at those things like technology and processes, and how can we eliminate natural risks that are associated with human error.
Right.
Because you can't take people completely out of the process, but how do we help them do their job better and avoid those kind of errors? Right. And then, in terms of future work going forward, ultimately, there'll be a written report that comes out from this committee. It will encapsulate all the things that I've talked about, but also identify maybe some steps forward in terms of here's the ultimate things that we'd like to see happen to the water system, with the goal being that we've identified the issue that the subcommittee was created for, but also through that work we can identify things that will make our system better, so that we're better on coming out of it. And so that's really kind of the overview of the process of kind of what we went through and what we're continuing to go through at this point.
No, that was great. I appreciate that. So factors. Do you want to start?
Nitrification.
Yeah, nitrification.
So you've heard the term quite a bit up until this point, and we knew while we were going through the first boil water notice that nitrification was the cause. However, that's not enough, right? We need to understand what is nitrification, what causes nitrification, how do you prevent nitrification to really understand what went wrong.
Right.
And so rather than us simply just Googling it, we have really good resources with TCEQ as an example. And TCEQ themselves have quite a bit of information around nitrification, when you implement, chlorine conversion, quite a bit of information out there. And TCEQ has really good literature that makes it very clear that how you prevent nitrification is through several factors. One is you basically keep up with your sampling. And that sampling is important because it's what activates certain elements of your nitrification action plan. Because if you're sampling and let's say you're sampling that and it's beginning to show the presence of nitrates, which leads to nitrification, then you need to start doing certain things. Keeping up with your sampling would alert you to a drop in chlorine residual because it doesn't just magically drop overnight. So it leads you to triggering certain proactive measures to stay on top of that chlorine residual, right? So keeping up with the sampling, having it in a format that allows you the ability to react and respond in a timely manner is critical. We know that preventative maintenance plays a factor in preventing nitrification. Specifically for us, that means keeping up with the 200 flush points that we have throughout our system that need to be flushed once a month. We know that aging infrastructure can contribute to nitrification. Not a leading cause of nitrification, to be clear, but can contribute to it. And so as a starting point, it was really good for the committee to understand those, because as we started to do the further research, as the mayor suggested, we started to identify where we fell short, basically, as it relates to preventing nitrification. And so, as an example, the logs that the mayor referred to that we reviewed in a meeting with them very clearly showed that chlorine residuals started to decline at the end of May. And so we ultimately made the conclusion as a committee that the nitrification action plan should have been enacted in June. And it was not, which also helps explain why when we were in the first boil water notice, it took 6 days to get out of it. Because we thought that we would be able to just flush the lines in the area that was impacted.
Right, I
and that
remember
then
that.
we would be fine. But we hit a harsh reality the week of that nitrification had been allowed to permeate so severely that the only way to alleviate the issue was to do a chlorine conversion.
Right.
And what's interesting about that is that in our own nitrification action plan, and even the one that's suggested by TCEQ, it does show chlorine conversion as your sort of last recourse of a solution, because it's pretty invasive to go through a chlorine conversion. And it's time consuming, which ultimately led to being under a boil water notice for 6 days.
Yeah.
And so we very quickly, as we started to research the data, started to realize that there was a human error attached to it. And we could have stopped there, but it wasn't enough, because then we need to ask other questions. Well, whose responsibility is it? How is that information presented to facilitate implementation of the nitrification action plan, as an example? And so to really understand that, we solicited the help of our human resources department, who conducted very specific interviews with employees to try and understand what's going on. And ultimately what that revealed is that we don't have, or they're not trained enough on our standard operating procedures that conveys to them what to do in certain situations. It also revealed that the problems that we have with being short-staffed directly contribute to our ability to keep up with that preventative maintenance.
Right.
We have 15 personnel out at the surface water treatment plant with 7 operators. We currently have 3 vacancies on the operator front. And out of the last 30 months have only been fully staffed 7 out of those 30 months. And so when you don't have the staff to keep up with the flushing, it only contributes towards that nitrification. Right. Now, there are other factors that contribute to nitrification, consumption, infrastructure.
Right.
But those I don't want to necessarily focus on too much, because I think we need to focus on the elements that we have more direct control over,
Right.
which is people, process, and technology, right? And so ultimately, that's what we want to focus on as a solution,
Right.
to prevent this from happening again.
Right.
And through those interviews that we had with employees, we also identified a very clear lack of communication amongst them. And this deference to plant management as opposed to empowerment of staff to be able to solve problems when they arise. I showed on Wednesday a very easy to understand chart that shows the decline in chlorine residual beginning at the end of May.
Right.
Anybody looking at that doesn't even have a certification or a license to run a water plant would be able to tell something's up. That's not how information is presented to staff. And so I want to be very clear, as I was on Wednesday, that the current system that is used to track the results of sampling is a very old school method, which is writing it in a log.
Yeah.
And so if I, for example, wanted to see what was the result of that sample 2 months ago, I'd have to flip through a binder to go back and look at it.
Yeah.
And I'd have to flip through multiple pages to and mentally track a trend.
Right.
Because it's not being produced in a manner that allows me to easily see it.
Right.
How I displayed it on Wednesday.
Right.
Right. Now, in the absence of having that software, that technology, it still should have been identified as something that needed to be addressed. But to the mayor's point earlier, how can we leverage technology to make it easier for staff to identify those trends? How do we make it easier for more staff to be aware of these trends? Because again, currently, if you're just dependent on a log, you physically have to go to the plant, you physically have to go inside that office, you physically have to flip through the pages. And so let's use technology to ensure that Public Works leadership, as an example, who doesn't have a permanent presence at the plant, has access to that data.
Right.
And so those are some of the changes that we're focused on right now, is just how can we use technology to ensure that the data is tracked in a better manner. Let's sample more often. And so, for example, previous to boil water notices, we were tracking, or testing, I should say, chlorine residuals at different points throughout the system, mainly the towers,
Right.
weekly. We've changed that to daily. TCEQ requires to check for nitrates and nitrification every 90 days. We've moved that to weekly. And so we're doing our part to try and ensure that we not only are sampling more frequently to try and identify things being off sooner, but also doing it in a manner that exposes more people to that data so that we can enact the nitrification action plan in a timely manner, which is what we identified did not happen
Right.
in June and ultimately led to what we've all experienced.
Right. Well, there's two different boil water notice incidents, and every one is treated different, right? They're not all going to look and feel and literally take place the same way. You've said that in the past. And so I thought it might be helpful for context for those who are listening, which thank you, by the way. That was a lot of good responses I think the public really wanted to hear and be reassured of, is how are we holding ourselves accountable? What are we doing? And so I think what I wanted to come back to was, what were the differences between the two boil water notices? You know, I know one was a little more centralized versus the other was in an isolated area. And how did our response plans differ based on the two? You kind of alluded to it
Sure.
earlier,
No,
but
that's a great-
maybe spend a few minutes talking about that.
Yeah, that's a great question, because there are some common factors, right? Both caused by low chlorine residual.
Right.
Both incidents, by the way, resulted in investigations that also brought to light some consistent themes, like lack of communication, lack of standard operating procedures,
Right.
the challenges of being short-staffed, as an example. All of those elements also played a factor in the second one. The biggest two differences is the geography aspect of it. I should have started off by suggesting or reminding and educating that the chlorine conversion process lasts 30 days. That's not, because ultimately the goal of the chlorine conversion is to basically replace all the water that's in the system
Right.
with different water that has more concentrated chlorine, right, to clean the system of anything that might be out there.
Yeah.
It takes 30 days for that to take place. And it takes 30 days because we allow it to happen organically, meaning that as people just use water for their everyday purpose, they themselves are clearing the system of the old water,
Right.
and it's being replaced. There are parts of our system, though, that are not utilized as much, mainly perimeter areas, dead-end lines, things of that sort, that necessitate intentional flushing in order to get rid of the old water. And so in the first instance, we were unaware of the extent of the presence of nitrification.
Right.
It took 6 days, right? And the physical location of it, even though it was somewhat within a certain area, it was in the middle of town. And
Can you cut to that graphic, AJ?
Much more difficult
Thank you.
to much more difficult to articulate it.
The other one.
Much more difficult to map it out.
Right there.
Much more difficult to isolate, even just through conversation or visually, right? And so, consequently, our approach to communication strategy around the first boil water notice was basically giving into the idea that this potentially could be an issue throughout the entire city. TCEQ requires you to issue a boil water notice for the whole system, which by default makes it seem like it could be an issue throughout the whole system.
Right.
But it was difficult to articulate that it was not
Right.
during the first boil water notice. In the second boil water notice, if you can cue up that map,
Yep. We have a graph
It-
that we used
it
in the
was-
news releases. There you
it
go.
was very clearly at the very end of the system, which facilitated us being able to map it out, articulate it as such, reassure people in other parts of the community that it wasn't an issue because it was a documented issue just there, right? And so there were differences in that respect. The difference, too, in the response time. And so during the second boil water notice, we were already in the middle of the chlorine conversion. So basically getting that chlorine residual within compliance happened quickly
Right.
because we were already in the chlorine conversion. And so I mentioned on Wednesday how, unfortunately, how things played out on that Wednesday of the second boil water notice was that as we were going back and forth with TCEQ, working with them, trying to request that they work with us because we knew we would solve the problem quickly. By the time we issued the boil water notice, we had practically fixed the issue.
Right.
And so that gave us the confidence to also continue to convey that this issue has been resolved quickly, right? Now, we were able to get out of the boil water notice within 2 days, much quicker, obviously, than the 6 days. But in our mind, we could have prevented that second boil water notice altogether had we responded a little differently the morning of, but also had TCEQ work better with us on giving us a little bit of a grace period, which they normally do, and they did.
Which was 24 hours to rectify it. Right.
Right. Yeah. But to be clear, regardless of the fact that they did not,
Sure.
we did identify opportunities that we missed that morning because we self-identified the
Yeah.
chlorine residual issue that morning. We had staff that went out to that area by the airport to flush the system, to facilitate chlorine conversion, reaching that part of the system. And so we self-identified that there was a chlorine residual issue in the area.
Right.
We just did not address it or fix it as aggressively in a timely manner as we should have, which ultimately I think played a factor in TCEQ's decision to require us to issue the second boil water notice later that afternoon. But those are the two similarities and differences between
Right.
both boil water notices.
Well, it sounds like we've got a bigger picture and a better map, so to speak, of what it was, and that's great to hear. And you guys have been talking about your findings from that. So real quick, before I segue over to our next segment, which we like to do in every episode, and it's very appropriate here. I don't know, Mayor, I didn't want to cut you off, but did you have anything you wanted to add to that process?
And no, I mean, I think Mr. Garza hit the nail on the head that, we had opportunity. And, I mentioned in the meeting on the 13th that one of the human error was a little bit of inattentiveness to data.
Sure.
We had the available data that told us what needed to get done. It was the inaction of acting on that data in accordance with the procedures that were in place. And
Right.
so, that's fixable. we can definitely fix that.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
we've taken steps to do that already. I know there'll be more steps coming, both internally, but also through input from third parties, experts in the field that we're going to engage and have engaged to come in. Some additional training from TCEQ is planned, and then we've actually hired a firm to come in and kind of just take an overall look of what our operations look like, where can we shore them up, where are the holes, what do
Awesome.
we need to plug in.
Yeah.
And so I think through that process, we will get that outside input that will help us, identify the best path forward to shore up those issues.
Right. That's great. Well, real quick, I want to go over to, we have Sam here in the room, in case y'all didn't know. Sam is our communication specialist, but really just a great perspective on what she's seeing and hearing, because she does support me in this department in answering questions, whether we receive them through the phone, through email, what we're hearing out in the community. We try and keep a pulse on what's going on in the community. What are the common themes of misinformation, misunderstanding at the end of the day, right? And so, Sam, I'm going to turn it over to you for a quick sec, because we're going to hit Sam with the word on the streets.
Thank you. And as you know, if you've seen this podcast, normally in this segment, we'll kind of single out one or two things that we want to address. Today, we are going to do things a little differently. We're going to be looking at some sort of broad trends that we're seeing out in the community of misinformation, or maybe just people who are speaking from a place of not having the full context of the situation. So the first one that I wanted to bring up is the fact that these boil water notices and the aftermath occurred right in the middle of when we're talking about the budget and the tax rate. We have a new budget year coming up. And so people have tried, I think, to draw a correlation between the two. We're seeing people saying things like, well, I pay all this money in taxes. Why don't we have a good water system that's funded by my tax dollars? They're talking about it as if it's an infrastructure problem. And just as you have alluded to, this is not principally an infrastructure problem. And consequently, a lot of the ways that we're going to try to fix it are not necessarily things that will take a lot of funding. They are things that we can start working on right now.
At least for now, right?
Yeah.
And so do you
Right.
guys want to speak to that?
Did you just answer your own question, Sam?
I think so.
Well,
great
that's
answer.
that's my thoughts about it. What are y'all
Right.
perspectives
Well,
on
I
that?
think just really quickly, I think it's important to differentiate that in our world, there's a difference between a ratepayer and a taxpayer. Those two things are not the same thing. Our utility system is paid for by the ratepayers. You paying your water bill, sewer bill, that sort of thing. A taxpayer is paying property taxes, sales taxes. That money goes into our general fund, which funds the core operational departments of the city, mainly police and fire. And so there is no correlation at all between conversations that we're having about tax rate, things of that sort, and the utility system. Those are two completely different things. Now, obviously, not everybody understands or is in the know of those intricacies. Not all money is created equal for us here at the city.
Right.
We have enterprise funds, meaning I can't, as an example, we can't take money from the utility fund to hire police officers.
Right.
That money that we receive through the ratepayers has to legally be spent on the utility system.
Right.
And so as we're looking to make enhancements and improvements to the system, whether they be infrastructure or operational, the funding source for those is the utility system and would never be the tax rate.
Yeah. That's good. A good distinction to make.
Yeah, and there's actually cities that they hire out their utilities. And so they're actually funded through a third party.
Right.
Obviously, that's more expensive, but
I was gonna say.
I think it highlights that they really are separate functions
Right.
of governance.
Yeah, that's good.
So,
Well, Sam, I know you had another one to breeze over pretty quickly. Jesus, I think you already answered it in your presentation, but did you want to go over that one?
Yeah, talking about utility rates and whatnot, another common question that we've seen is simply, where is my $10?
Sure.
So
Which is a
So-
good question.
No, and
Councilmember Butler asked the question.
on Wednesday at our council meeting, and basically those credits are being rolled out throughout the month of August.
Yeah.
As a reminder, those credits are only applied to residential single-family homes.
Right.
And we have 4 cycles, billing cycles throughout the month, throughout any month. And so the August cycles will include that $10 credit. I encourage folks to look at their bills. It would be identified as an other, and it would show -10. And so if people have already received their water bill for the month of August, it's on there. And for those that haven't received it yet, it will be on there during their respective billing cycle throughout the month of August.
So Sam, did you have another word on the street for us to
yes.
clarify?
Yes, of course. And I know that we're wanting to kind of keep things moving, but I do have one more thing to bring up, last but certainly not least. We did see some false information being shared out in the community that was alleging contamination of the city's
Right.
water system. So I thought it would be really useful to go over the difference between detecting contamination, which we did not, versus having a low level of disinfectant.
Right. 2 different things.
Yeah, absolutely. So at no time was there any bacteria that was detected in the system
Right.
through all the testing that was done, both the testing that we did internally, but also through TCEQ's testing. So the difference is that, just as you alluded to, is that chlorine is put in the system, as we do every year. You know, we do the chlorine conversion every year, basically to clean the system out and to avoid issues, like bacteria growing in the system. It is not chlorine. A low chlorine residual doesn't mean that there is bacteria.
Right.
It just means that TCEQ has set a level that they say 0.5 is their level, that say they want to see a chlorine residual of 0.5 within your system.
Right.
Now, that is their pick. You know, if you look at different organizations and different entities, the levels that they require vary. They're all over the place, you know, from 0.2 to 0.8, but TCEQ's is 0.5. And so the lack of that specific level of chlorine residual in the system does not mean that there's bacteria in your system.
Right.
If you think about, for example, well water out in the county, you
Yep.
know,
That's a great example.
you're going to have no chlorine in that system unless they're treating it themselves. And so that doesn't mean there's bacteria in the system just because there's an absence of chlorine.
Right.
But the chlorine residual is required by TCEQ.
Right.
It's just kind of a statewide standard
Right.
that's painted with a broad brush on every municipality in the state.
And to be clear, there was never a point where there was no chlorine
Right.
residual in the system. It just varied. And so,
Right.
for example, in both boil water notices instances, that chlorine residue at those respective sites where TCEQ suggested or found that the chlorine residue didn't meet standard, they were meeting standard throughout the day, you know, so it wasn't this consistent issue, right? And so as an example, at the site of the first boil water notice, I mean, we were meeting residuals, you know, at 8, 9 a.m., and then it dropped below 0.5 at noon. Then it came back up at 3 p.m. Then it went back down at 6, right? And so there was never a environment that was created in the system that would have facilitated the growth of bacteria.
Right. I hear you.
But from TCEQ's perspective, you need to be at 0.5 consistently at any point in the system at any point in time.
Right. Yeah, that's a very helpful distinction to make. We did see and hear, whether it be online or in person, a lot of misunderstanding about that fact. So thanks again to Sam with the word on the streets. Okay, folks, we're going to keep it moving. Really, the next thing that I wanted to hear from you two is about what action is being done now. What can we expect in the future? What are some of those measures that are being put in place to resolve this and prevent it from happening again in the future? And you kind of alluded to it already, but let's hear a little bit more about that.
Sure. I certainly already alluded to the focus on people, process, and technology, and I gave some examples in how we're leveraging better software to track data. Have more routine sampling. But ultimately, we understand that the people part of it played a factor. And so what I mean by that is we need to prioritize addressing two things. One, making sure that we have the right people in place. We have some key vacancies at the surface water treatment plant currently that we need to prioritize filling.
Right.
So that's a priority for us. We also have operator vacancies that need to be filled. And so we need to prioritize. We need to develop a more aggressive recruitment and retention program to ensure that we have people there.
Right.
That's not only a challenge for us at the surface water treatment plant, but also a challenge for us within the Utilities Division of Public Works. Utilities Division of Public Works has roughly 20 vacancies. And so we need to be more mindful of that. And I made the comment on Wednesday, and I'll reiterate it now, that every position with the City of Victoria is equally critical and equally important. I understand why people want to focus on police officers and firefighters, but our community is obviously very much impacted if we do not have proper staffing levels at the surface water treatment plant or within our utilities division. And so we need to focus on that. We also need to focus on the process aspect of it. And so meaning the standard operation procedures.
Mm-hmm.
We need to focus on those. And we do that through what the mayor alluded to earlier, partnering with different groups to try and identify and improve those. And ultimately that boils down to training. And ultimately that boils down to holding people accountable to do it the right way consistently over time. And so one way that we're doing that is by having public works leadership on site more often to reiterate that message, right? Reiterate the message that we need to do it this way now. We need to be more consistent with doing it this way now.
Right.
And so it's going to take some time to develop new habits, like it's human nature, right? And so we're focused on ensuring that we are doing that.
Well, to kind of send that message home, and you can continue talking, I just want AJ to prepare to gear up a clip that we also pre-prepared for the point of this whole podcast for those who maybe didn't catch, again, the special city council meeting. And you kind of ended that point very well by talking about accountability for yourself, for others around you, for the department. And so if you don't mind, I'd like to cut to that clip of Jesús saying that very sentiment at the city council meeting, the special August 13th city council meeting. So can you cut?
While we're in the middle of still trying to figure out exactly how that looks and what that looks, I assure you that we are and we will hold staff accountable. Now, that doesn't mean firing staff, but accountability is about making sure people have clear expectations, that when they're not met, there's very specific consequences to that. Holding employees accountable means ensuring that they understand what's at stake, that they have the tools and the resources that they need to be successful. And I assure you that I'm doing my part to ensure that that takes place.
Well said. Well,
that's important.
Yeah,
right? And I do think, and I made a comment at council, actually, when we were recapping the first boil water notice, ultimately it is my responsibility to ensure that every employee of this organization has the tools and the resources that they need to be successful. And that doesn't just apply at the surface water treatment plant.
Right.
And so I certainly do take it upon myself to ensure that we learn from this and that we be better at ensuring that people have the tools and the resources that they need to be successful.
Right.
And part of that is not only what I just described up until this point, but leveraging better equipment. And so, for example, one of the things that we want to lean more into is utilizing automated flushers. And so, this map, for example, thank you, AJ.
you're on point.
Showcases where we currently have some automated flushers and where we're proposing adding automated flushers. As I alluded to earlier, we have 200 flushing sites throughout the city. We currently only have 13 automated flushers. We need to add some more. And this map shows the proposed locations, which is the purple square. And so those are already being procured. And so this is an example of us trying to move as aggressively as we can to try and use more equipment and technology to just help alleviate some of the pressure that it being a very human-centric operation has.
Right.
And so that's an example of something else that we're proceeding and are in the process of procuring to get done. Another thing, and there's no slide for this, but another thing that we're working on is trying to explore basically some mixers that go inside water towers and our ground storage tanks, because we know that one of the factors that leads to nitrification is standing water.
Right.
And so if water is not going to be consumed as much, or if we're going to not be able to be as aggressive with flushing because of staff shortages, then we need to find other ways to not let the water just sit still.
Right.
And so one way to do that is to acquire and install these mixers that go in the storage tanks that just keep the water moving. And anytime you keep water moving, it helps counter the nitrification, right? And so another example of us trying to lean more into equipment and technology to help the cause.
Right. Awesome. Mayor?
And to add to that, one of the things we're doing through the committees, we're looking at how can we improve our technology? How can we improve the software system we use, for example? How can we improve what we do with the data that comes out of the SCADA system, and
Right.
how do we upgrade that? Obviously we've seen through this that data alone doesn't solve the problem, but getting that data when you need it and where you need it and to whom you need it is very important.
Right.
And if we can utilize or leverage technology to help decrease the possibility of human error, then that's what we need to do. Again,
Absolutely.
you can't take people completely out of the process, but we can give them better tools, we can give them
Right.
better equipment to help them do their job better.
Right. And I just want to extend on behalf of myself, I know people around us, I'm sure staff and the residents who have been actively involved in what you guys have been doing. I do want to extend an appreciation for you guys for holding yourselves, for holding this organization accountable and saying, hey, we didn't do it right, but here's what we are going to do. And I think you said that. You said, we're going to make this right and we're going to do it the right way.
Yeah.
I think that's what you said, right? In
Absolutely.
the council meeting?
I did.
And it resonated with me because, you can put a Band-Aid on something, but you got to really address the root cause. And that takes time. It's not
It
overnight.
does.
And
Yeah.
so I appreciate the work that both of you, your leadership, and I know it was tough. And I know our residents felt it too, but I think now we can move forward and look to see what you guys have in the future. So I want to thank you again for being on this program.
Thanks for having us.
And
Yeah,
before we
thank you.
wrap up, I do want to say to those who are listening and watching that you can access all of this information and more, news releases, past council meetings, probably even this Town Talk episode, on our newly created webpage for you guys to tune into this and stay up to date on recent developments on the topic. And it's victoriatx.gov/water. And I think you're going to hopefully you cut to the webpage so that we can see what it looks like. You can watch city council meetings, right? Those happen the first and third Tuesdays of every month at 5 p.m. And, upcoming budget discussions are going to happen as well. Stay tuned to those. Be sure to sign up for future emergencies or just even your day-to-day. If you're a city account customer, even if you're not in city limits, you also can subscribe, by the way. It's called our Cities Alert Center. You can visit victoriatx.gov/alerts to subscribe to those. And then, of course, continue to follow us on Town Talk. We have a couple more exciting episodes in nature here coming up as we gear up for back to school, as we kind of recently underwent that. You're going to hear from a very familiar voice on that very topic. And then, of course, we have a big event coming up this fall, and you'll hear from someone on that topic as well. So thank you again for listening. Thank you both for being here, and we'll talk to you next time.